Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TVR's webcast, Network Function Virtualization, Critical Success Factors. My name is Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's webinar. While production deployment of NFV elements is still a year away or more, service providers are working closely now with suppliers to define their requirements. This momentum is already requiring suppliers to shift their product mix, margin expectations, and cooperation in an open systems environment. This webinar will point to the critical success factors that are being identified for suppliers to gain an edge in the early days of NFV. Before I pass this over to Michael, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Michael will address them at the end of the presentation. Or, if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out either directly to Michael or myself at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. You can also find these slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and we'll share all our social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Michael Sullivan, trainer. For the last 7 years, Michael has covered the telecom vendor and service provider landscape. He has extensive insight into emerging trends and is the content and consulting lead for our networking and mobility practice. He is frequently called upon by our clients to provide strategic insight to help navigate the shifting market landscape. And with that, let me hand this over to Michael.
Thanks, Allison. Welcome to this NFV webinar. Welcome for those of you who attended the February NFV business case webinar. This will be an update. And for those of you for the first time coming to this topic, welcome. Network functions virtualization and software-defined networks are the most exciting transformation of network architecture that many of us have seen in 20 years. They parallel IP in their impact, but unlike IP, there are changes within the network industry that will improve the network's ability to address the needs of customers, whereas IP has arguably caused more disintermediation than value to the industry. So in this webinar, we'll talk about the sense of urgency that is behind the movement for NFV, what kind of issues need to be addressed in order for NFV to cross the chasm from early stage to production adoption, what are the pressure points on the service provider marketplace that's causing the movement towards NFV, what's the current map of NFV proof of concepts, where are the vendors and suppliers landing right now with their NFV early implementation plans. What do the service providers expect to achieve from network function virtualization? What's therefore the task being put before the suppliers? How does this translate into critical success factors for the suppliers? What are some of the responses we see suppliers taking? What are their early strategies? Who are the key partnerships and how are partnerships being formed in the NFV world? Ultimately, we're going to look at which suppliers are in leading positions at the moment in the early days of NFV, and then what's next for the technology. And as Allison suggested, there'll be time for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Firstly, it's possible to characterize the move to network functions virtualization as the need to cross a chasm between the existing architecture that we're comfortable with today and a totally new way to architect networks. We'll get into the detail of what that is, review some of that concept. What we know, though, today is that many operators are interested in taking or at least investigating the leap of faith necessary to move from the traditional architecture to the new. We can perceive more than 20 proof of concepts, many of which are sponsored by the ETSI industry specification group for NFV. Many others are not. They are being held by the service provider initiatives, either publicly or privately. We believe there are at least twice as many private NFV trials as there are the 20 named public trials that are available from various sources. We believe these are going to be trials that have, many of them have begun as early as a year or two ago, but have moved to aggressive stages in 2014, and most have a timeline to close with specifications leading to further implementation in early 2015. And with that, we believe there will be a crossing of the chasm. The specifications coming from the POCs will, in fact, create the opportunity to deploy production platforms that will be able to operate at scale in operator networks, easily taking up the majority of time between 2015 and 2020, and beyond that as we move to different layers of the network. Early indications are there's a cap and grow strategy about NFV. That is to say, it's not going to be rip and replace. It's going to be as old elements that are creating a service instance become no longer valuable, less efficient, or their end of life, they'll be replaced by NFV elements. Some recent evidence of this is the statements coming from AT&T and its Domain 2.0 strategy, where they've moved from talking about Domain 2.0 as a broad concept to pilot projects regarding NFV, and specifying a set of early entrants, early suppliers, both legacy suppliers and startups, and viewing things such as let's implement new software-based controllers with SDN or NFV concepts to integrate both the virtual and the legacy world. So there's already an immediate movement going on at a company like AT&T. Another example is Telefonica, which through its Unica project has a broad architectural change in mind that moves the operator entirely to an NFV SDN infrastructure, and with the plan that 30% of all new investments in infrastructure are going to be in the new architecture. And we expect this kind of movement to take place from operator to operator, particularly across tier ones, creating a cap and grow environment that will bring forth more NFV and retire a legacy at a gradual pace. So we can see the other side of the chasm. We can see the activity going on this side. Let's take a deeper look at that. Before we do, why is there such a sense of urgency? All of us living in this industry understand that. This is just to review those finer points. The business model of the service provider is under extreme pressure. In many cases, the combination of continuing OpEx growth despite efforts at efficiency over the past 10 to a dozen years is still a factor that must be brought under control in order to get some relief on the margin side. We clearly see the continued growth of data traffic, expectation that it's going to grow tenfold by 2019. So more CapEx investments will be required in the infrastructure. So the left-hand side here, the out-of-control spending, it can feel out of control from a CFO's perspective in the operator, simply because more money has to be spent just to keep the course of business as it is, meet the needs of the demands of growing data traffic, and apply the necessary operational expenses to manage the network. So that side alone argues for a tremendous shift in how networks can be built and deliver services much more efficiently. So that's one big driver of NFV, underlying the efficiency drive. The competitive pressure, of course, is another factor. In many markets, in mature markets, there's a saturation of the subscription base, so it's about capturing subscribers from each other, and therefore resulting in price wars where the net impact on the marketplace is lower ARPU, which of course does not help margins or help with the expense challenges that we just talked about. So the competitive pressure within the marketplace among service providers. Then of course the oft-stated factor is understanding the disintermediation that's happened, content and over-the-top players reaping the value of the data services, so a bit of a cap or struggle to obtain more value from data services from the operator side as another competitive pressure requiring a change. And we see a lot of shift going on there. Of course, the very recent move of AT&T to acquire DirecTV, really trying to bolster a content monetization play alongside its network play. Expect to see more activity of that nature. irrespective of the ongoing move towards NFV. Expect to see the use of NFV capabilities to enable a greater developer ecosystem to onboard applications more rapidly that can be monetized by the service provider, seeing ways to work more closely with over-the-top players to find out how to do that monetization. And we just mentioned here that regulatory environment is a key factor. The changes happening in the U.S. with respect to net neutrality, for example, are actually making it easier for operators to think about ways to combine network quality of service with over-the-top services or their own kinds of preferred service delivery. And this all only goes to marry nicely with the NFV trends, which allows a greater catering of service functionality on a per-user, per-service basis to cater to that demand and new monetization models. So we see recent trends, particularly on the content side, as being another reason to push forward with the NFV transformation that's taking place. Here we're going to look at where and who and on what elements is the early action for NFV. Asking the question, so who is involved from the service provider and supplier side? Shorter answer is everybody, or nearly everybody, and perhaps it's best to qualify that as saying if you're a Tier 1 operator and you're a large supplier, whether IT and focused on telecom or a telecom-specific supplier, you're engaged in proof of concepts. And here we have a collection of more than 20 proof of concepts with location for multiple partnerships between the vendors and the operators. Multiple vendors involved, of course, in multiple proof of concepts. Many of these take the form of bake-offs between different suppliers trying to reach the requirements of the operator. In other cases, they're more lab-based. Let's just see if we can accomplish this partnership between the sponsor operator and the suppliers involved. Some highlights here. We see a bit of a lead, sort of, if you can call it that, with Telefonica, and no surprise there with what they're talking about with Unica having a majority of publicly stated proof of concepts in network functions virtualization. AT&T has a few that is publicly stated. Almost all of the major Tier 1s are deeply engaged. And on the supplier side, one of the more active players, of course, is Intel. Intel is a critical piece of the transformation infrastructure for the commodity servers or commodity processing that's going to be required in many of the NFV instances. Interestingly, though, we see Huawei moving with a number of trials and having a significant position coming from some early investments they've made in virtualization infrastructure. Other players there, Alcatel-Lucent, Ericsson, Dell, we see quite a mix of suppliers. But just be clear, these are not all the POCs these vendors are involved in. These are some of a sampling of the public ones they're involved in. We also see concentrations, of course, in the mature market world. A lot of the NFV activity emerged in the European environment, so we see that very high cluster of operators in the European environment, a number of Tier 1s engaged, significant activity in the United States. The data point in Latin America is Telefonica present, so that's really an extension from Europe. And then the activity that Huawei is working with the Chinese operators is highlighted there, as well as Fujitsu activity with the Japanese operators, and we see Telstra participation and Optus in Australia. So on one hand, it feels like a significant amount. These are very large Tier 1s and in a number of major regions in the world, but we're a long way from the amount of adoption and spread of NFV that's going to be taking place in the future. One more area of importance in this slide is, so where are the POCs, what network elements are involved? We're seeing a focus first on media delivery elements, CDN, IMS elements, being able to create a network functions virtualization architecture of the IMS elements to allow them to be more distributed and delivered more efficiently, and the content delivery network as well. Then we're seeing control elements being the next most frequently POC'd, the Evolved Packet Core and mobile network as a prime example. Then there's development probably a little bit ahead of some of the earlier NFV activity in the SDN, so some SDN implementations, particularly working within the data center to create an SDN infrastructure in the network for the data center, and then beginning to think about how to move that out into the broader production network. And so virtual data center concepts being experimented with as well. And then we see eventually movements to home gateways and the broadband aggregation. These are all areas that are more complicated to deliver on, but there's a belief that there's higher value there. And finally, and probably most importantly, is the management, automation, and orchestration, which some suppliers and operators identified early on in the NFV process, but lately it's become quite clear that there's not going to be a delivery of end-to-end solution without across-the-board management of an NFV infrastructure that has the ability to orchestrate the functions and provide automation. Not yet a lot of POCs there, however. That's really an area we expect to see a lot of short-term development and an area for focus. So then what are some of the expectations of the operators within these POCs and within network functions virtualization in general? As I just mentioned, it's about a managed, orchestrated, and automated set of functions to deliver the service to the end customer. But that's not all. It's the traditional requirements of the service provider are very much still in place. The new infrastructure has to meet performance requirements and high reliability, the ability to deliver still as a carrier-grade service capability, the ability to scale across the hundreds or thousands or millions of user instances that are required. It has to integrate tightly with the legacy infrastructure. As I pointed out in the beginning, we're not seeing a throwaway of legacy infrastructure by any means. We're seeing an integration. And that integration is going to be a very important touch point. And I would mention most of the POCs do not involve legacy integration steps yet. So we expect that those specs are going to come out of the POCs and then move to a next step of legacy integration testing before we move to production. All to the goal of delivering an end-to-end service to end device capability through a network functions virtualization architecture. And we use the framing of ICT, the IT, and the communications technology. It can be perceived as ICT, even just the fact that the basic technology of network functions virtualization is itself IT. But what we mean more holistically is the ability to work within and utilize the data center capabilities in a lot of the operators to deliver the different sub-networks that are going to be required for NFV in a real more IT managed way. So definitely moving to converged ICT down the road. Caveat today is that many of the network side operations in the service providers are not yet believing they need to necessarily merge with the IT side. So there's a bit of contention between CIO and network operators to determine how to roll this out. But definitely both need to play and both need to be coordinated to deliver on this set of expectations. And as has been stated in the past, if that's not enough, all this needs to be an open, shared, and efficient experience. By that we mean open source utilization, and we see a lot of catering to open source, especially OpenStack. It needs to be shared. That is to say, the functions are very often a chain of elements provided by multiple suppliers, not to mention the legacy. And of course, it needs to be high efficiency. Very hard to achieve that. And shortly, we expect by the end of this year, we'll have some concrete quantities about, okay, how efficient, in what areas efficient, and how that efficiency be was that brought about? Efficiency as translated into some of the checkmark boxes below. Are we experiencing driving towards increased utilization of our infrastructure? Are we using less power? Have we actually consolidated server hardware, for example? Have we actually saved OpEx eventually of the cost of the long-term running of the network? Are we delivering reduced man hours? Is it going to cost less to support because of that great management, orchestration, automation that's going to be more self-managed? And can ultimately we deliver faster services? Can we onboard those services faster and deliver them to the end customer? So what's happening is these set of expectations are crystallizing a bit. It may have been seen in the early days that just delivering on some of the ability to prove that network functions can be virtualized and managed and orchestrated within the set of network elements in a sub-network like IMS. Now we're seeing the pressure being put on to prove that it can be delivered into a production environment for the operator. Let's take a closer look then at the critical success factors of NFV. This is a reference architecture from the ISG, and it shows the multiple layers of the network that have to play in a network functions virtualization end-to-end scenario to deliver a service in the new architecture. Everything from creating a resource layer of hardware capabilities in the compute, storage, and networking layer, the physical network, which can be leveraged as virtual functions by the network functions. So you get the virtual resources available to the network functions. And then the network functions themselves are in turn virtual instances that are deployed as needed, all the way to creating an abstraction layer that can be then specified for that service type. So imagine a service that can be highly efficiently leveraged end-to-end from a set of virtualized resources all the way down to the physical network, and of course orchestrated and managed. Not a simple task, and the big change that we've seen as we go through the mid-year, into the mid-year here of 2014 as the POCs continue, is the attention focused on just a single one of these layers or one of these functional dynamics is shifting to this end-to-end view. How do we string it together to deliver a service, to deliver some of the use cases, to mature the view of use cases that have been put forward in the POCs by the ISG and by the operators themselves. So coming back to the topic of critical success factors, it's which supplier can deliver a total network architecture, which can have a combination of integration capabilities, design capabilities, portfolio elements, or strong partnerships to create that portfolio to deliver at each of these layers, deliver on the virtual functions, deliver on the creation of the resource layer at the compute, storage, and network level. Those are very key. In addition to that, then we come back to end-to-end management, orchestration, automation over the top of that to deliver on a service set as efficiently as possible. And then to complete the business case for the operator, it's increasingly important to understand that network functions virtualization is by no means done for the operator when you've implemented an end-to-end architecture. We highlight here a developer ecosystem that can onboard those services. The proof point to deliver on network function virtualization are there services, and are there in fact new services that are going to drive new revenue. That's the final payoff of network function virtualization that I think we're still a ways from. We see operators beginning to move in that direction and think about how to negotiate and develop the developer channels for a network functions virtualization and architecture that feels ahead of where the suppliers are, which they themselves are in the middle of developing ecosystems for the individual functional elements to deliver the architecture. But those things are going to catch up with each other in time, but it's very important to realize as a supplier it's not enough to deliver the architecture, it's very important to get involved in the developer side of this as well. So we took another view here to try and reduce the understanding of what the supplier strategies are into three major kinds of strategies to come at the totality of requirements of network functions virtualization. The first one, as I've been talking about, is the end-to-end owner, differentiating as an owner of the entire process. That requires certification of the service end-to-end and of the architecture underneath the service, the different layers we just talked about, being a project manager to deliver on that and have ongoing control of that, being able to manage and integrate partners and onboard them, and of course, having legacy integration. Then a second strategy is to become a critical platform. It's to look at that architecture and say, okay, it may be more than our portfolio or capability as a company can take on, or we just do not see value in being able to be that broad. That will require too much scale for us to do. So let's choose critical platforms to drive at. One of those critical platforms being the management layer, the management automation and orchestration, being the vendor that can supply the complexity of that for individual services, for use cases, or across any network functions virtualization SDN environment, is a very good strategy for assurance of being part of the solution that most of the operators will adopt, and it serves as a place to draw in, feed in additional product that might be related to that. Incidentally, the E2E owner is also in a position to draw in additional portfolio under their umbrella. And then the third strategy we highlight is to be an embedded partner. And this flips the critical platform on its head. It says, okay, I'm going to be providing the key components to somebody else's critical platform or somebody else's end-to-end solution. And so being the partner of choice, we by default, I believe, have someone like VMware as the partner of choice, for example, as one of the most popular virtualization or hypervisor platforms. These kinds of solution selections, very good for a smaller ISV or a supplier that just wants to focus on a particular domain in the network and be the specialist there. The other cut we take here is, as I mentioned, ICT. So we have the network or the communication side and the IT side, and as is evident in operators, those two parts of the organization exist and will exist for some time and require different catering and no surprise have different supplier sets delivering on those strategies. We believe similar strategies pertain, though, whether you're a network player or an IT supplier, as you can see, and we have highlighted some of the leading participants with those strategies as examples. So as is highlighted there, the end-to-end owner in the network side, more typically in Ericsson, where the end-to-end owner in an IT scenario is frequently with IBM. Both companies strong on their services arm to do that end-to-end assurance, bring in the management, integrate the legacy, and integrate partner along with a significant amount of their own portfolio. And then highlighted in the critical platform, we see Alcatel-Lucent has a strong strategy in management and in really the key infrastructure to facilitate NFV integrated tightly with the SDN. This is a significant critical platform play. EMC, there's the combination of what EMC is doing with its federated solutions, both the VMware instance that we talked about, the pivotal applications capabilities, and of course the storage infrastructure are all possible critical platform plays that EMC can be pulled through for the network functions virtualization. And then as embedded partners, highlight Nokia Networks only because within the space, particularly the RAN EPC and what is considered the liquid applications. These are all areas that Nokia Networks is able to differentiate and perform as a embedded partner in an overall solution. Granted, within the RAN, within the EPC, they may be the critical platform, but if we look at it from an end-to-end solution, that ends up being a partner play for a broader end-to-end supplier. Similarly, highlighted VMware already in the IT side as that kind of critical platform. Last but not least is, well, who among these players are going to try and take the mantle of being the ICT player? So this means an entire services organization and full portfolio that extends through servers and storage and networking on the IT side to the network elements, whether it be in the mobile network, the fixed network, the different enabling infrastructure elements. There's only a couple of players that have invested in an entire solution set in that way, although it's argued that an Ericsson or an IBM would position themselves as the ICT player, but they would need to source some of the server or storage elements, for example, that a Huawei wouldn't, for example. So Huawei is an example of having decided to build virtually everything required for network functions virtualization delivery, and is busy beefing up its services organization to be able to stand up to the task of being the end-to-end ICT player. And we highlight Cisco here. Cisco, with the exceptions of storage, has invested in much of what's required and at the physical layer, and of course has a number of resources within the network up until and through some of the network elements. They're adding more network elements all the time to expand that, and has a strong set of partners. So those are a couple of the ICT total solution providers we do expect to see the ability of other players to appear there. And I would just, before leaving the slide, just say these are early days. These are early strategies. And I don't think anyone has made a full determination of where they're going to land yet. I will say decisions about portfolio investment and investment in breadth of services do need to be made in a fairly short amount of time, or the suppliers are going to find themselves living in one of these strategies, whether they want to or not, because they will have insufficient resource to challenge some of those that have made the investments. Wanted to highlight next a little bit about what partnering means in network functions virtualization, since partnering is so important. The requirement of openness, best of breed, these kinds of factors are very important for the service provider to really be able to accept and certify the supplier's network functions virtualization solution delivery as something that's really meets the spec. The goal there is to be able to move in and out of technology more easily and not be locked in to proprietary architectures, proprietary solutions. We expect that's going to continue to be a contentious matter between the operators and the suppliers for some time. However, we do see three approaches. These are not new to the industry. These are approaches that adapted from elsewhere that now are evident in network functions virtualization. They are co-development, mutual integration, or a bundled offer. Co-development, we see some of the larger players with critical platforms, Alcatel-Lucent, Intel, Dell, Red Hat, and even Ericsson and Ciena, picking partners where they've agreed to do co-development. So they're not simply putting together their solutions in a loosely coupled way or integrated way, or even light bundling. They are creating a joint solution. In the case of these highlighted, we're seeing extensions in work around OpenStack, because as we know, OpenStack is more of a framework and spec than it is a hard and fast delivery requirement. So how OpenStack is implemented to cater to the requirements of network functions virtualization and SDN is a bit open to shifting as far as adding new specs, new capabilities, new standard extensions. And so we see both Dell and ALU taking that choice to work with open, focused player like Red Hat to accomplish that. This provides a strength of both open source credentials for a player like Dell or ALU, as well as provide some unique functionality within the standards platform that lets them deliver something different with network functions virtualization. Alcatel-Lucent and Intel doing something similar, going down to the server level to really be able to demonstrate performance improvements, platform tuned for the kinds of network functions that ALU is bringing to the marketplace. So that's a strong strategy. And then lastly, the example there of Ericsson and Ciena. There are simply some complexities to bringing an FE-SDN to the transport layer, and Ericsson chose to focus its approach to that with a specialist, Ciena. That increases their speed to market, and it creates an opportunity for them to take that to the operator and also jointly approach their install base and say, look what we have for you. Next, mutual integration. The player here tends to be IBM. IBM has what I would consider to be a relatively light approach at this point to its network functions virtualization strategy. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so it's working with various partners to fill in some major solution sets that it doesn't have, integrating it with its infrastructure plays, its software plays, and its particularly management plays. And then we highlight smaller players doing that same thing, Cyan and Kenton, focusing on orchestration and transport. So those are areas where they're trying to be critical platform, but not by doing it themselves, but by jointly working together to do it. Although it's a mutual integration, it's generally non-exclusive. And last but not least is bundled offers, and everybody's bundling with everybody else to obtain a position in the ecosystem of OpenStack or Open Daylight, or be part of a vendor ecosystem. In some cases, the vendors are sponsoring these ecosystems, Alcatel-Lucent's Cloudband being a prominent and early example of that. So there are a number of flavors. So the takeaway here is we've gone over the things a supplier needs to do to achieve full compliance within all the network functions virtualization, and then those strategy choices to say which of those are going to be the focal point for the supplier strategy. After or alongside of all that, a decision needs to be made about partner strategy, because partner strategy is critical to this industry in general, but network functions of virtualization in particular. Are those main strategies going to be supported by which of these three approaches, all three of those approaches, and so on? As you can see, the approach to network functions virtualization can be quite complex, or it can be quite simple if it's a selective focus strategy or partner strategy that's chosen. So now I'd like to talk about, highlight the positioning a little bit more closely of some of the lead suppliers we see engaged here. We have highlighted already the position of Huawei with their SOFCOM architecture, which is a true ICT architecture extending from the data center side through to the network elements. Began this process about 2 years ago and have now been able to be positioned in most of the POCs that are in the marketplace because they're ready with an architecture and a portfolio, and definitely positioning to be an end-to-end ICT player, caveat being working on building up professional services and so on in places where it does not have already an install base that it can leverage the relationship with the operator. As I mentioned, Alcatel-Lucent believe they have a head start with Tier 1 service providers in the critical platform, or early on with SDN and NFV implementations through their investments and their own development, and have recently been able to present a very integrated story around SDN and NFV and highlight the management capabilities. So we see them very strongly positioned to be an early recipient of some of the production revenue from NFV and SDN, and by necessity. As we know, ALU's gone through a number of changes and decided to really focus its company strategy on this architectural change. Ericsson's well positioned as a player in a number of the tier ones, obviously from its install base, and has already very on the heels of announcing that it had a professional services transformation practice that was delivering on NFV and SDN on virtualization. It was selected by AT&T as one of the Domain 2.0 players to do that, so clearly positioning to be that certifier and that overall transformer for the tier ones is what Ericsson's about, and they've had a success there. So while the first two players we've gone over are more product-focused plays where we've seen the greatest value, not that they don't have services, it's just that their product strengths have come to the fore. Ericsson so far is its services strengths are coming to the fore. That's not to say they don't have a full product portfolio, they do, but it's about bringing that together with the proposition. Cisco, another flavor, and again, a more product-focused, and has a very broad SDN NFV ready platform that cuts across network elements and services we talked about, but needs to partner for some critical areas. Don't see, due to the cap and growth strategy, don't see a huge turnover in their data networking. In fact, what they'll be likely to do is be able to replace a lot of the data networking install base they have with the new architecture that they're implementing. So Cisco's position is fairly strong in NFV SDN. We see potential strong plays from HP and IBM, though it appears that they're a little bit behind some of where some of those network players we just talked about are. HP just announcing its NFV organization in February of this year. It is a energizing their approach to the marketplace, bringing in their elements and delivering on it. And suddenly, just in this year, HP has become very much more prominent in network functions virtualization, all to their benefit. Being one of the larger players on the IT side, will have a place in some of those critical platforms, and certainly in the end-to-end management for some operators. However, as we've been talking about, a number of these other players have been at this a few, 2 or 3 years in the making to get to where they are. So we believe IBM has some ground to make up. And even more so, we believe IBM has some ground to make up. I meant HP has some ground to make up. Now IBM has some ground to make up too. Coming to the market beyond a more of an umbrella modern network approach to focus on NFV. How are they bringing forth their own architectural view of this and integrating an ecosystem of partners, things that IBM's known for, but as yet hasn't done in a strong way in this NFV environment. And before I leave this slide, just highlight, can't emphasize enough how critical it is if you're one of these suppliers or you're not one of these suppliers, but you're playing in the service provider business, developing a strategy, understanding the balance with these other players, as well as the other factors we talked about. It's critical to get there. So then I wanted to bring the presentation to conclusion and leave some time to questions by talking about what's next. This slide is the Network Functions Virtualization release timeline for the ETSI Industry Specifications Group, and it highlights the flavors of or milestones of work going on around the POCs and the working groups for the various specifications with release timetables. And you can see we've already passed February and are just now coming into the May gate, but there's this full expectation and specification that these gates are going to continue to be met, and milestones to deliver a full set of NFV specifications driven by the POCs by the early days of 2015. And I should say all those blue SP NFV circles are not in the specification map, so don't go looking for it there. That's a little bit of analyst license to suggest that post-2015 we're going to see a blooming service provider NFV implementations, moving towards production phases, taking on some of those issues that I've been talking about, such as legacy integration, such as scale and performance. We do believe, though, that before we get there, some of the POCs and some of the private trials are going to be showing enough of the business case to understand where the savings should be. So the question that gets answered in 2015 and beyond is, can something that's identified in a POC or a trial actually still be proven at scale? Will the economies of cost savings pertain? Will the efficiencies of service delivery pertain going into 2015, 2016, and beyond? So that concludes the presentation. We have a lot of activity to continue to track, and we will be making periodic movement towards the development of NFV in our research as we continue to follow these cases for the service providers and the supplier community, and as well as advising on how to hone the strategy and implementations. So thanks very much. With that, I'll turn it back over to Allison, and we can take some questions.
Great, thanks, Michael. And to those of you, there was a thought leadership piece that Michael had written as a download to this webinar. If you haven't had a chance to download it, you can also go to our website and get that paper that Michael wrote on NFV. So we have a couple questions in queue. I do encourage anyone that has questions to send them through now. Michael, the first question we have is, where does service chaining fit into the NFV solution?
That's a good question. So service chaining, something we've tended to see as more of an SDN factor, but I would take a step back and suggest that service chaining is a vital component of network functions virtualization delivery. So we need to be able to identify the resources in the physical and virtual infrastructure that comprise what a service needs to be delivered at the appropriate quality, appropriate performance, and so on. And so service chaining becomes a very important concept, and we see some of the suppliers developing some focal point around service chaining. It's another way to say I can do the end-to-end delivery capability required and of value for network functions virtualization, and do it across multiple architectures, multiple layers. It's a way to demonstrate the end-to-end architecture. And I feel like it's a very important concept to underpin how services are delivered in the NFV environment.
Okay. Earlier in the presentation, you were talking about customer requirements, and so we had a question come through. Which vendors, in your opinions, are leaders in meeting these customer requirements?
Depends on the requirement. Realistically, it's about, right now, putting the lens of network functions virtualization on it. The first requirement is to meet the spec of automation, orchestration, and delivery at all those layers. And I think we have cases, Alcatel-Lucent, as I mentioned, has a fairly early lead in moving into some demonstration of that. We see most of the other players moving very quickly to deliver there. None yet has proven the scale and deep depth of integration performance, partly because that hasn't been implemented yet, but that's really the true test. So I think there's some early mover advantages perhaps that ALU has obtained, but I think whether those advantages can continue as we go to scale and as the other players begin to assemble their execution remains to be seen.
Okay, next question we have. What are the success factors for OSS BSS in the NFV market?
So OSS BSS is where management lives, as we all know, running the individual network elements and delivering the appropriate subscriber and payment elements of the service are required. Over time, the OSS BSS environment has already been modularized or turned into, in many cases, at least a software-oriented architecture. So in many cases, there's an early readiness to assemble the OSS BSS elements and processes as a virtual, to support virtual instances. However, concepts such as more automation and orchestration and management across not just the virtual elements, but touching the appropriate points in the process for the OSS BSS, that's work to be done yet, and we understand the zero-touch orchestration operations and management, or Zoom project that the Telemanagement Forum will be doing a lot of talking about in a couple of weeks at Telemanagement World Forum, is a key specification in that direction. So there's a whole other presentation to be given on Zoom and the details of that, but suffice to say OSS BSS process optimization and module optimization for the virtualization environment is also a task that's going on in parallel here.
Okay. The next question we have, how big is the NFV market expected to be in 4 to 5 years by 2018, 2019, including hardware, software, and services?
Really big. Seriously, we're in the process of looking at that. The dynamic is, as we are just coming to the conclusion of the cap and grow. So, and you understand it is a multi-layer analysis to understand which of the elements are going to be onboarded first. So the revenue that is going to be acquired from implementations in the control layer, in the immediate delivery layer, those will be some of the first leading edge revenues, and then it's going to percolate down into the transport layer. So we don't have, at this point, that answer. We will be having some estimates later in the year. I would say stay tuned. But we just want to highlight the 2 factors that are causing a challenge in the dynamic is understanding at what speed which layer is going to be capped and grown, and then how to make that a cumulative statement across tier 1s, across the rest of the industry. So we have 2 or 3 different adoption dynamics going on, as well as some proof points still to be made before Certifiers press the accelerator.
Okay. We have one more question in the queue, so if anyone has any additional questions, please do send them through now. The last question we have, Michael, what about other operators? How will they adopt NFV?
Yeah, so we've observed there are 2 operator strategies in the market in general, and it's proving to be the case with NFV. Having a conversation with one operator, such as an AT&T or Verizon, is very different than having a conversation with a Rogers or a Bell Canada or American Mobile or many tier 2s. The conversation with some of the larger tier 1s is they're looking to own a good deal of the intellectual property, intellectual capability of the new architecture. Companies that feel that that's their DNA. And so their approach is to work with the supplier closely, get the suppliers to meet their specifications, add their own capabilities to it, and have that approach, so more of a custom view. The other suppliers are going to be a combination of, one, they'll look to the tier 1s and follow that, so what suppliers were successful there, and 2, they're going to be looking for more packaged solutions. So tier 2s are going to be looking to vendors to say, how can I get what you just did, or see that it can be done at an AT&T delivered for me in a very efficient, possibly lower cost package. I'm going to be lower scale and so on. So I would expect I could get same benefits, but more off the shelf, if you will. Many months, years perhaps away from really true off the shelf network functions virtualization. We're talking architectural transformation after all. But over time that will be pointing in that direction. So tier 2s, tier 3s, follower operators are going to be a second wave, perhaps even a third wave of adoption, and they're very likely to do it as a packaged, more and more packaged or services supported solution, even a managed services solution, than the tier 1, which is going to tend to do look for the solution as a all-in custom project with a real joint skin in the game by the supplier and the operator.
Okay, we had another question come through. What is the first 3 years' impact on volume of services provided by vendors?
So the impact, we have looked at that and do see that we have contradicting trends. That is to say, those services tied to, as you can imagine, traditional networking, particularly the hardware, traditional customer support, are going to have a downward bias. We're going to see an upward bias in professional services, particularly consulting, systems integration, all those services required for a typical network transformation. So you may think about the network transformations that have occurred in the IP world or in the OSS, BSS world. Those are good templates for how professional services will be leveraged and grow very significantly as a result of this NFV, and we expect that to be a bit of a bubble over the next 2 or 3 years. That investment in increased professional services will not, of course, decrease OPEX. In fact, there will be an increase. Most of that will be OPEX funded. However, over time, there will be a strong expectation that that will be a term investment that will be flattened out, particularly when the benefits of the management and orchestration are promulgated across the entire network architecture. That's one trend we see. The other trend is, as I said, the CapEx-related hardware-based services are going to, from an early stage, continue a downward bias, and we don't see that recovering just because we're seeing server consolidation. We're seeing consolidation at every level of a network element, and where we're getting new servers, they're going to be lower-cost commodity servers. So the shift there is really pretty clear to map out about the arrow pointing to higher professional and lower product-attached services, and that playing out pretty rapidly because we're not waiting then just for a lot of product purchase. We're going through transformation phases already. No matter what part of the network it is, the services are going to need to be engaged to get them off the ground.
So with that, it looks like we're at the top of the time. So I want to thank you, Michael, for your presentation, and thanks to all of you that have questions for us. For those questions that we weren't able to answer today, we will be following up with you offline to get you those answers. As I mentioned, we are going to share all the social media links with you, so they're here on your screen. I do encourage you to follow both Michael as well as TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here. He'll keep you up to date on the research that he's working on, as well as his opinion of what's happening on the NFV market, as well as joining us on SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We do have communities there. You can get access to our research and interact with our analysts, as well as our content. On the way out of the webinar, we have a short survey. How valuable was the presentation? How good was the presenter? And is there any additional feedback that you'd like to share with us? We do use your comments and your feedback quarter to quarter to help tailor our research agenda, so we do appreciate any insight or commentary that you can provide for us. I'm going to leave the social media. I'm going to leave the webinar open for another couple of minutes in case there's any additional last-minute questions or requests to get tied with Michael to speak about NFV or any of the other topics that he covers. And if we don't hear from you today, we will bring you more thought leadership webinars in the coming quarters and more research on this topic. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks.